Welcome to Ideas in Action, the official University of Southern California podcast. This show was recorded live on USC's campus.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for being with us here for this event to start off Earth Week. Earth Day, of course, is Thursday, but this whole week to celebrate the Earth, we're here to talk about LA's fossil fuel-free future. I'm Sammy Roth. I'm going to be moderating this conversation. I cover energy for the Los Angeles Times and have been writing quite a lot over the last few years about this topic of how Los Angeles gets to 100% clean energy and how the state of California as a whole does that. And that's what we're going to be discussing with our three panelists today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves shortly, but just a couple quick things. If you're watching on Facebook, I'm told that if you like this event and share it, that'll get more people to watch it over the course of the hour. So that would be a very good thing, I think. And, just briefly, about myself, I've been covering energy both for the Times and for the Desert Sun newspaper going back about 7 years now. Studied sustainable development in college. So this is a topic I've had a long time interest in. And people talk about climate change and the environment. And from my perspective, it's like, really what it comes down to is energy. I mean, dealing with these topics in one way or another comes back to how do you, move the energy system from one that's dependent on stuff that pollutes to stuff that doesn't pollute. So, at the end of the day, climate, I think, is really an energy story. And that's what we're going to be getting into here as we kick off Earth Week. So let's have our panelists introduce themselves. We've got Kelly Sanders and Adam Rose from USC and Lauren Faber-O'Connor from the mayor's office. Maybe Lauren, you want to start here, and then Kelly and Adam, and talk a little bit as well about your involvement in this. I should say, City of Los Angeles just released a report, LA 100, done with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, studying pathways to 100%, which we're going to get into quite a bit. So if you could also just talk a little bit, each of you, about your involvement with that report, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Sammy. Hi, everyone. Happy Earth Week. I'm Lauren Faber-O'Connor. I'm Mayor Garcetti's Chief Sustainability Officer and have worked for the mayor since 2015, soon right after he released the city's first ever sustainable city plan, where he said that every 4 years we need to update that plan. This was one of the most ambitious plans integrating the 3 E's, environment, economy, and equity, that cities all over the world have really emulated and taken on it and internalized that integration since then. 4 years later, the mayor released LA's Green New Deal in 2019. This wasn't just a 4-year update. This was really understanding how much has changed from the urgency of the science and the knowledge around policies and technology. Out of that, we had set significantly accelerated renewable energy goals. I also, Sammy, like you, I studied climate change and energy in college and grad school. I hope there's a lot of students out there watching today. And so really want to make sure folks are interested in getting involved in these really important issues that are going to set ourselves up for really important sustainable futures. LA 100 really came out of the mayor's commitment to clean energy, to a climate safe future. I would submit that he is one of the most passionate and committed elected officials you could find on this issue. And back in 2016, really in the wake of the Aliso Canyon natural gas blowout in Los Angeles, which happened at the end of 2015, we really said we have to figure our way out of these kinds of threats and harms. And we set a goal to move forward with 100% renewable energy. And I'll talk a little bit more, Sammy, about how that study got started in a moment. But really, it was the impetus of working with our city council and other partners, research partners, both here and nationally, to answer these really important questions.
Thank you, Lauren. Kelly, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I'm really excited about this conversation. My name is Kelly Sanders, and I'm an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Southern California. And at USC, I teach a lot of classes related to energy and the environment. Our classes look a lot at decarbonization, which really, set up a nice foundation for this study. My research group at USC looks a lot at, again, how energy systems decarbonize, how energy systems impact the environment. And I also look a lot at the tensions between energy systems and water systems. And that kind of bridges into my involvement in this LA 100 project. So as a lot of you might know, Los Angeles has a very unique water system. So on any given day, up to 90% of your water might be imported from, various locations, from the Colorado River, from Northern California. So our energy system here locally is actually pretty energy intensive. And because of that, the city has put forth a lot of sustainability plans about how we might source more of our water locally. So how we might recycle more of our water and reduce some of those imports. Why does that matter to a decarbonization plan? Well, LADWP, the Department of Water and Power, really spends a lot of electricity treating its water. And so it is an integral part of this plan. So I worked a lot with the teams that were modeling some of the electricity demands of our city and looking really a lot at that water system and how that might use electricity in the future. So again, really excited to be here, and I'll pass it off to Adam.
Thank you. I'm Adam Rose, and I'm a research professor in the Saul Price School of Public Policy at USC. I'm also a senior research fellow at the Schwarzenegger Institute for State and Global Policy. I've been working on energy and climate change issues for many years. I also work on resilience to disasters, both natural and man-made. And we often think of climate change as long-run warming, but also there's short-term climate variability that has led to an increased number of droughts and more intensive hurricanes. So on the LA 100 study, I was one of the lead authors of the chapter on economic impacts, primarily focusing on jobs of 9 clean electricity scenarios. And this has yielded some very important findings that I'll talk about in a while. But in terms of background, I've been working on climate change for 30 years, starting with some work for the UN on cap and trade systems globally, and more recently on advising about 10 states on the job impacts of their climate action plans. And I'm very interested in making sure that climate policy is effective and that it's fair, both in terms of environmental justice locally and burden sharing between developing and industrialized countries globally.
So those are all topics I want to get into: jobs, the energy, water connections, political leadership. Before we do a quick shout out that I should have made at the beginning, if you're watching this and you have questions, pop them into the chat on Facebook, and we'll get to some questions from the audience at the end of the hour here. I think that the big picture thing that I want to ask about, there were many different results in this study, and the one that stood out the most to me, I think, was the finding that not only could Los Angeles feasibly get to 100% clean energy by 2045, which is the target that's set into law in the state of California, but that conceivably the city could do it by 2035, 10 years earlier than that, and that's the year that President Biden campaigned on, of 100% by that year. What's amazing to me is just how quickly the kind of conversation is moving around this. I mean, it was only like 5 or 6 years ago that California was debating whether a 50% renewable energy mandate was going to be doable, and then that became law. And just 3 years ago, we got around to the 100%. And I mean, things are just happening really, really fast in terms of what seems to be possible. But why is that? How is that happening? How is this moving along so quickly? I was thinking maybe Kelly, you would have some thoughts here, but I imagine Adam or Lauren might as well.
Yeah, so I can kick it off. I think that there has been really a pivot in public sentiment about this issue. So, no matter whether you're living in Texas or California or the Midwest, who's experienced a lot of floods and droughts in the last few years, the Eastern Seaboard, who's, experienced a lot of really unprecedented hurricanes, it feels like this word unprecedented comes up over and over and over and over again, particularly in the summer. I'm living here in California, where the wildfires wildfires season has just gotten longer and longer. So I think that, the United States public, regardless of a political affiliation, is really feeling these climatic extremes themselves, and it's affecting our pocketbook. You look at what's happened in Texas just a few months ago in February, when an unprecedented amount of people in the United States, in this very rich country, lost access to electricity and water services. So I think that the public sentiment is changing a lot. There's no longer this push for denialism. And I think that that's putting a lot of pressure on our political leaders. And I think that one of the really neat things about this LA 100 plan is, the city of Los Angeles is actually making a tangible plan that then other cities can kind of look at this process, and it creates a precedent for the rest of the United States to find their own individualized plans.
Well, just to pick up on that, so I was saying when we were developing LA's Green New Deal and working with stakeholders across Los Angeles, this wasn't just an update of, okay, how are we doing on our previous plans, and let's, adjust the goals accordingly. This really was a recognition of probably three key factors. One, the urgency. So, in 2018, that's when the UN came out with its, seminal warning to the world that we had, at the time, 12 years to really change our ways, reduce emissions, and prevent the most dangerous, irreversible impacts of climate change. That was a real wake-up call that, although the UN has provided wake-up calls, one would argue many times before, this one really did have a reverberation, I would say, globally. So two, the political mandate, I would say, from the public was really changing, that there was an appreciation for and a real concern that had been growing around the urgency, which was changing the politics around us of the issue. And then the fact that technology was changing so quickly, and it's changing because there's faster commercialization, because more countries and jurisdictions are taking up these clean energy and renewable energy solutions. And so looking at those three factors, we saw that we needed to make a huge jump, that this wasn't about a 50% renewable energy goal. This was looking at a whole scale decarbonization of our economy. And it was really, I would say, those factors that made us take that kind of leap.
So let me chime in and say, I think one of the things that's affected people's attitudes is our experience with disasters recently, this cycle of droughts and wildfires that where the droughts really contribute greatly to that. And the other short-term climate variability, the scrambling of climate in terms of periods of high rainfall. So when the drought is over, then you get a lot of rainfall, and that grows a lot of vegetation, including underbrush, and then the drought dries it out and just makes it a tinderbox. The other aspect of disasters that's somewhat ominous is hurricanes were almost unheard of in California, but lately more of them have moved up farther north. One of the things I'd like to mention about the longer term, there are predictions that by the year 2100, the average mean temperature in Fahrenheit would increase between 5.6 and 8.8 degrees. Now, that usually makes people's eyes glaze over. They can't quite comprehend that. What I've always found to be the best visualization is a map that shows Boston and asks you, well, have you been to Boston in the summer? And you say, yes, it's not so hot, it's breezy. And then say, well, if these climate change predictions pan out, Boston's climate will be the same as Atlanta's by the year 2100, which is hot and muggy during the summer. And finally, with regard to the LA 100, I would emphasize that we investigated 9 different scenarios with different mixes of energy technologies to deal with all kinds of contingencies and progressions. And that made it one of the most comprehensive studies to date on that score.
Adam, I just want to say when people talk about average temperatures going up, what always gets me is less the average temps go up a couple of degrees, but when you look at the extremes, I mean, I lived out in Palm Springs for a few years, and so it's like, it's one thing to say the average is going to be 92 instead of 88 or whatever, but when you say there are going to be X number of more days when it's 125 degrees,
that's true.
That gets you, I think.
Right. And the example I gave, we can bring home locally to say parts of LA, not along the coast, but inland a little bit in the city and the county, would by 2100 have a climate and temperatures much more like Palm Springs than they have now. That's that visualization.
So we're talking about all the reasons to move forward with this. Lauren, I want to go back and ask as well. I mean, you talked about how the mayor has moved forward with this, and after Aliso Canyon and the UN report seeing that more action was needed. As I've reported on, there have been challenges as well, politically and sort of with the feasibility of all this. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, I think 2.5 years or so, that DWP was still planning to spend a couple of $2 billion rebuilding those gas plants along the coast so that those could continue to operate for many decades, and now the plan is to shut those all down in relatively short order. There was the issue with the union at LADWP where some of those union workers there at IBEW were not happy with that plan to close down the gas plants, and they at least briefly held up the approval of a solar contract that was going to be a record low price for solar, which was a pretty exciting news story. Could you just talk a little bit about, I guess, what it's been like working through this with the engineers and the folks who actually have to get it done, who are sometimes skeptical up front, and also the labor issue and how you're thinking through that at the city?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I have to say it's been an incredible process. It's actually a real privilege to be able to be working with all the implementers all at once, whether they are the workers, who are out in the field, the engineers who are designing projects and modeling those out, and, maintaining the infrastructure as well. It is absolutely a learning process for all of us. It's much easier to say, let's go 100% renewable energy by X date. What's really exciting and important is that the city of Los Angeles, by the sheer fact that we own and operate our own municipal utility, the largest municipal utility in the country, and it is a utility that still is what's known as, and if students out there are studying energy, what's known as vertically integrated. And so what that means is that, we own and operate what the mayor likes to call soup to nuts. So we own and operate the generation infrastructure itself. So whether that's, as you say, a gas plant or a solar facility, we are responsible for the operations. We also then own and maintain and build the transmission that moves all of that electricity about, including then the distribution system that brings it into the end uses. And we deliver that electricity and have the relationship directly with our customers. So basically we do
all the power plants and all the poles and wires.
Everything, yeah. And the bills and the programs that deliver affordable electricity. And then, not to forget, we run the grid. So we actually are the system operator to make sure that 24/7, we have the right amount of supply meeting the demand that's there all the time without fail. And so that means that every step along the way, we are responsible for that solution. And it's true, folks are accustomed to doing things a certain way and trust that the system works by doing it that way. And so it does take, and rightly takes, time to learn and understand how to adjust systems in order to accommodate different forms of energy technologies. And that's okay. We need to learn that, and we need to change and evolve, and we need to make sure that the way we're integrating all that technology is done very responsibly. What's exciting is that the study shows, and the way we've been integrating increasing amounts of renewable energy and energy efficiency and distributed energy resources together into the city, is that we can absolutely maintain a reliable and affordable grid. And the most exciting thing that the LA100 study shows, having integrated all of these questions, going through 100 million scenarios, looking at how we're going to start, plugging in our cars and our buildings into the grid as well, dealing with climate impacts in the long term. It took all of that into account, put 100% renewable energy in there to service all of those things, and still said we can run a reliable grid that is affordable and that increases equity across the city. So that has to happen foundationally so that all the operators throughout the utility can trust it and can move toward those specific solutions. To your question about workforce, this is also a change. And what's so important about the LA100 study and about our policymaking overall is that it has to be inclusive and transparent, that we have to bring everybody along so everyone knows what we're doing and the pathway to get there. And that's key to all of those discussions.
So I want to go to Kelly in a minute on some of the reliability and resilience here, but before we lose the thread on workforce and labor, I mean, Adam, you as you said, you wrote the chapter in the study that dealt with overall economic impacts. Talk a little bit about what you found there, and I guess I'm just interested in this in the context of when people at the national level are debating climate and energy policy. So often it becomes these sort of fierce arguments about, creating clean energy jobs or getting rid of fossil fuel jobs. So what did you find with regards to Los Angeles?
Yeah, just following up on that, I've been working on evaluating climate action plans for 15 years, and the debate gets pretty polarized. So you have some people saying, well, a clean energy plan is going to bankrupt the economy, and others saying, well, it's a panacea and it's going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle there. And what we found was that there were a couple of scenarios that would call for, let's say, early attainment of the goals with no biofuels included, that would actually lead to some job losses. But some others would lead to job gains. But the thing about these are on the order of 4,000 job losses on the negative side annually, and 6,000. These are job years, not total job, but job years on average, and 6,000 on the plus side for the positive ones. So this represents less than 0.5% of the employment base in LA, and that's an important thing to remember. So the outcome is neither of the extremes, and like I said, I've done these job impact studies for 10 places, Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the SCAG region, and the results are pretty much always the same. I might also point to the Biden plan that just came out, the infrastructure plan, which has a lot of clean energy considerations. And there's some transition considerations. And that is, I don't want to be too cavalier about job losses, because everybody, that small percentage that's unemployed, each one of those people is 100% unemployed. And we need to be concerned about them. And so the Biden plan has a lot of options for retraining and providing subsidies to people who might face job losses. And often the focus is on Appalachia, but it's across the board, especially retraining to clean energy jobs.
Yeah, and one of the things I find really interesting on that point is, even if it's, as you said, a small number, and the people who have those jobs tend to be in, fairly politically powerful, positions a lot of the time. I mean, I mentioned the example with IBEW here in Los Angeles, but you've seen the same thing in the state legislature in California, where the building and construction trades, I mean, just last week, again, played a role in killing a bill that would have, limited oil and gas production and put buffer zones around oil and gas drilling. So I guess, do you have any perspective on, I guess I'm just curious, Adam, I guess what you think are how you think that we as the public maybe should think about those impacts and who's affected, and what, should or ought to be done, politically to work through that stuff.
Well, personally, I think we need to be concerned about people who are potentially unemployed on the one hand, but on the other hand, the handwriting's on the wall, and there is concern for people now, but at some point we've got to draw the line and say, look, you don't have a future in coal mining or certain fossil energy production or related jobs. You need to start looking elsewhere. So that's the long-term perspective. Short-term perspective is to bring these stakeholder groups into the fold and hammer out some policies with them that will ease the strain for their membership, so they don't become a roadblock. I mean, there are ways to compensate people for the problems that they may encounter. And again, the Biden plan is very active on that. Now, I might say, if you read some of the recent comments on it, there are unions and trade groups that are critical, but historically, Biden and others have been able to work with these groups to hammer out a solution, and I'm optimistic that they will, in many cases, for this.
Kelly, Lauren was also talking earlier about resilience and reliability, and I want to circle back to that because I think it's one of the other major conversations that needs to be worked through. I mean, you referenced the events in Texas a couple of months ago and the cold snap they had there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you did your PhD research in Texas, right? So you're pretty
I was at University of Texas at Austin, so I was in the thick of it back then.
Yeah, so you know all about Texas, and obviously now you're in California, and we had our own, much smaller, but we had our own rolling blackouts here last summer that, occurred on, very, very hot summer days. There was an intense heat wave across the region, and we had these 2 evenings in California where the sun went down and, demand remained high because it was still hot and people had their air conditioners on. There just wasn't quite enough electricity to go around on those evenings. So I guess I'm wondering if you can talk us through a little bit, especially as we get to this point now where the conversation starts to be about shutting down gas plants that are typically what, are firing up during those, those hours. How do we think through keeping the lights on, around the clock with clean energy sources? And if you could just go into a little more detail maybe on what happened in Texas and California and what people are getting right and getting wrong about the causes of those events, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so if I can take the liberty to just kind of put on my professor hat, because I think the grid itself is this big nebulous, sophisticated engineering concept that a lot of us don't exactly understand how it works.
I don't know what you're talking about. When I say the grid in a story, everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm very confident in that.
Well, just in case.
Okay.
So there's a lot of wires that we see around the city and around the deserts. And so the interesting thing about the grid is it's this huge, complex engineering system, but you have to balance energy supply with energy demand at every single millisecond, which is an incredible feat of engineering prowess, right? So all of these power plants are constantly generating electrons, and they kind of throw those electrons into the wires, and then those electrons, offer us electricity to our businesses and our homes. And so again, at any given time, the electrons coming from those power plants have to meet the demand. So every time we flick our light switches on, we need a little bit more electricity in the system. Every time we take our, turn our TVs off or our laptops off, we need a little bit less electricity in the system. When those two things are out of whack, that's when you might have some sort of, reliability event. You might have some sort of system shut off. So when we think about Texas, well, what was happening there? You had a really high demand because people around Texas were demanding a lot of energy during this cold snap, maybe a lot for those electric heaters that some of us use. And at the same time, a lot of the power plants weren't weatherized correctly. And so they actually weren't able to operate reliability. So we had to take a lot of our power plants offline because they couldn't operate. So supply was very small at a time when demand was very big. And so the system had to do these rolling blackouts. A similar situation happened in this event that you described in California, where you had really high demand again, because we were all running our air conditionings, we were coming home from work, we were turning on our TVs and our electric ovens. And supply wasn't quite enough to meet that demand on that unprecedentedly hot day. So you had this mismatch. So how does that feed into this conversation about 100% renewable energy? Well, The grid gets a little bit more difficult when you add in these sources or these resources like solar and wind electricity generators that we can't just turn on and off like our natural gas system. So with fuel-based systems like coal and natural gas, you can kind of turn them up and you can turn them down according to demand. So as you go to a system where there's more intermittency, because we can't control the sun, we can't control the wind, you need a little bit more buffer. And that's where you get this big conversation about storage, like battery, hydrogen fuel cells. That allows us to get a little bit of buffer. So how does that feed into this conversation about reliability? Well, people are worried that as you get these really high penetrations of wind and solar into the grid, you have a lot less supply than you can control. And so that makes it a little bit more difficult to manage.
Let me pause you for 1 second,
yeah,
Kelly,
go ahead.
because this comes up a lot. That problem that you're describing of, harder to manage with lots of wind and solar, there have been plenty of people out there saying that that's what caused the blackouts in Texas and California. Is that correct?
That is not correct. No. So particularly in Texas, there were some wind and solar generators that had to be taken offline because they were not weatherized correctly. So we have wind in very, very cold places, and you can weatherize the wind turbines so that they don't ice up. That wasn't happening effectively in Texas. But you also had big problems at conventional power plants, like the nuclear facilities and the coal facilities and the natural gas facilities, as well as the natural gas distribution lines. So the actual infrastructure that brings
pipelines,
the natural gas
around. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
They just weren't weatherized. They were outside in the elements, and the parts froze. And so the whole system broke down. So no, that wasn't really a story about renewable energy. That was a story about a system not being ready to operate within extreme climates. Exactly. And we're going to see that more and more. But I think there's a huge opportunity with this shift to renewable energy, because we're going to have to rebuild our grid. We're going to have to put more solar in it. People are going to be self-generating some of their electricity on their homes. People are going to have batteries in their home. People are going to have electric vehicles, which are effectively batteries. And that actually offers a lot of resilience. If you can imagine the grid that I just described in Texas, Texas wouldn't have had the problems that it had. It would have been able, some of the customers would have been generating their own solar. They might have been able to pull some of their electricity from a battery system. So we will actually, or we have the opportunity to get a lot more resilient with our grid infrastructure, because the system that we have right now, while incredible, it's not really built to operate within these extremes, whether it be extreme cold, as we saw in Texas, or extreme heat, as we saw here in California.
And it feels like that's a bit of what you're describing there requires a lot of work, not just, better planning, but a lot of work. And, my sense is that, Adam, picking up on what you were saying, that the Biden administration really, is thinking about grid modernization, grid expansion, renewable energy expansion, and really kind of maintaining and improving upon the grid system. So the poles, the wires, the pipelines, all those things that we have, improving upon those is huge opportunities for economic growth and job creation. We see that here. One of the things that we did, Sammy, real quick, is that a couple of years ago, we started spending money on infrastructure upgrades, particularly focused on the hottest parts of the city. And so infrastructure would be, as you were saying, some of those poles and wires and substations and pieces that bring all the electricity into those end uses. We were focusing on the hottest parts of the city to make sure that they were really supported as we're seeing temperatures climb. What we saw was during 4th of July, a couple of years ago, heat wave in Los Angeles, which had record high temperatures that were extended for long periods of time, both in the valley and in the metro, kind of downtown city area. What we didn't expect was for those areas that are typically less hot in the metro parts of the city to get hotter than we've really ever seen. And so what was very interesting and what that tells us is that the work that we've been doing, particularly in the Valley, they fared so much better despite the extreme temperatures that they were facing. But really where we saw more difficult conditions, where there were some prolonged outages, it wasn't about not having enough electricity. Nope, that wasn't the issue at all. It was that infrastructure was melting. And so it tells us that we really have to spend the time, the resources, and the people power to be looking across all of our system. So we know that the work pays off. We just have to do it everywhere.
You know, what this whole conversation makes me think of is just how, you know, we're talking about global climate change, obviously, but in, you know, this transition, it's so much more than global climate change. I mean, you know, rising temperatures have, as you're saying, these very local impacts. And then, you know, you get all this other stuff. I mean, when you stop burning fossil fuels, there's local air quality improvements, and there's, you know, social justice and environmental justice aspects. You know, I'll open this up to whichever one of you wants to go at it, but I'm just curious, looking at the LA 100 study, what you see here as being some of the most important, I think the technical term that gets used is co-benefits, which I would never use in a story because it's terribly wonky sounding, but, you know, basically advantages that come out of this, you know, besides just less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
So let me take a start at that. And so some of the co-benefits, we've mentioned one already, and that's improved reliability. And let me just add a couple of things on that. You improve reliability in part by having a distributed system, decentralized, so not everybody's subject to the same central grid, which when that trips, everybody's out of luck, through things like rooftop solar, for example, or microgrids. The other thing to say is solar and wind in tandem can work magic in terms of reliability, because everybody knows, you know, the sun doesn't shine all day and the wind doesn't blow, but they're just natural complements to each other, in that wind basically kicks up and becomes much more effective when the sun starts to go down. And so those two things even out pretty well. So you can't pick one of them in isolation and say it's limited. If you take them both together, they're in pretty good shape. As far as some of the other co-benefits, these include job creation over and above just efficiency of the operation, but it also includes environmental justice and environmental concerns. And the thing we haven't mentioned, we talked a lot about climate change, but reducing dependence on fossil fuels also lowers ordinary air pollutants, which are a major source of negative health effects, and especially in poorer areas that are living close to refineries and other fossil fuel installations. So from an environmental justice, that co-benefit of lower ordinary air pollutants, including toxic metals, is a great boon to environmental justice.
What LA 100 did was it didn't just look at the grid system. It actually took LA's Green New Deal goals overall in all the major fossil fuel sectors, so transportation, building energy use, and of course then generation, electricity generation, and looked at how all of those goals that the mayor has set, zero carbon grid, zero carbon transportation, zero carbon buildings, how they interact. And for us, as you know, the policymakers, what we see, and you know, what LA 100 told us is that as you begin to introduce more and more electric vehicles into the system, whether those are passenger vehicles or trucks and buses, and as you begin to transition buildings into more electrified use as well, electrified equipment and appliances over gas, you're bringing down what the study shows us is that the overall cost of the transition to 100% renewable energy goes down because you're able to spread the investment across all those kind of load sources. So it's so important for us to understand, as a cost containment mechanism, actually electrifying more things helps. And then the double benefit on top of that is that those are major pollution sources. And so as we electrify our transportation system, the number one source of outdoor air pollution, and our building systems, which create a lot of indoor air pollution as well, then we're having this amazing overall impact in smog, in poor air quality across the city. So whether that's reducing at the power plant level or in transportation and buildings, LA 100 is showing us how important it is to not be doing this sequentially. We have to be running on all cylinders at all times to make this transition work.
And just to kind of piggyback on this idea of environmental justice, because I don't think that this could be overstated. You know, one of the tricky things about Los Angeles is you basically have this major metropolitan area surrounded by mountains, and the wind is typically moving from the ocean towards the inland. So all the pollution kind of gets trapped in that basin. The Achilles heel of California is all of our tailpipe emissions. So all of these pollutants that are coming out of our cars. And these pollutants are really concentrated around our freeways. We obviously have this culture that's very driving intensive. So like Lauren was saying, a key part of this plan is this transition from combustion fuel vehicles to electric cars. And the communities that will benefit the most from that transition are going to be the poorer regions. You know, the air tends to be a lot cleaner on the coast where more wealthy people live, and it tends to be cleaner in Beverly Hills where more wealthy people live and there's more green space. But the majority of those pollution impacts are happening around the Port of Los Angeles and also around the highway systems. And those are going to be the major benefactors regionally in terms of these reduced air pollution levels. So this is going to be huge for those communities, marginalized communities, communities of color, in terms of the positive health impacts that would be incurred by this type of transition.
So one point I want to pick up on there. I mean, you're talking all about the benefits to these, these disadvantaged communities, and that's very, very real. And I've reported on that. At the same time, you've got the flip side when you talk about transitioning to electric cars and electric heaters and stoves. Those are things that have upfront costs to people, and that's pushback that I've heard as well from groups representing communities of color and low income communities of how is this going to get paid for. And I mean, the LA 100 study, basically assumes that give or take in the next 20 years that, somewhere between most people and, nearly everyone who's driving is going to have an electric car, and who's, cooking and heating their home is going to have an induction, cooktop and an electric heat pump. So how do we get to a point where that, I guess my question is, how do you bring along those people for whom that's, really going to be a serious economic burden to do that, even if it does have benefits for them? Maybe Lauren, you might want to weigh in here on what the city is thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not operating in a vacuum. There's a lot of solutions that we can take the lead on, but we also know that there's a ton of work and investment that's going on at the state level and at the national level. And so when it comes to being able to access these clean energy solutions, whether they're in the vehicles or in equipment or improved energy efficiency in our homes and buildings, small businesses, all of the above, there is a lot that we as the city and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power can do directly. So we have some of the most aggressive energy efficiency programs that are going right into people's homes and small businesses and doing no cost energy efficiency retrofit. So we're saving people money at the outset. That, increasingly has included and will continue to include whether that's solar on people's roofs or, batteries in people's, garages or closets or outside their homes or any of those things. Those are all things that we can directly provide to customers because we see that overall it provides a benefit to the system of our overall power system. DWP also pays for the cost of installing a charging station. If you can install one in your home or your apartment building, the cost of the station and the cost of installation. We have some of the most aggressive incentives such that we have more charging stations in the city of Los Angeles than any city in the country. And that does not include what people are putting in their single family private homes. This is publicly available commercial chargers out on the street, on the sidewalks, in employer lots, in multifamily buildings where people really need them. And so we're trying to make all of those solution sets available to people so that those decisions can be made more easily. That includes rebates for used electric vehicles themselves. So we're, now in the business of providing direct rebates for the vehicle that you purchase. So everywhere we're trying to help people make the best decisions possible in the interest of their health, their energy affordability, and the overall sustainability of the city.
Do we ever get to a point where you just have to tell people you're doing this, here's some money and do it? Or does this, remain optional? I mean, we have, and renewable energy mandates, but you look at vaccines right now, it seems like everyone should do it and it's obvious, but not everyone wants to do it. I mean, how do you handle that when you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, in some cases, yes, we are doing that. In some cases, the state is doing that. Governor Newsom has said no gas-powered vehicles will be sold in the state, right, by date certain. And we're doing the same thing. Take, for example, the Port of Los Angeles. So the Port of Los Angeles, together with Long Beach right next door, the San Pedro Bay Port Complex is the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere. The Port of Los Angeles is owned and operated by the city of LA. So another, like DWP, huge infrastructure campus that has significant economic benefits to the region, as well as significant responsibility we have to our local communities, surrounding communities. The mayor has said that by 2035, all drayage trucks operating, so that's the major heavy duty freight cargo carrying trucks, they must be zero emission by 2035. So they just won't be able to operate in the port. And now we said that in 2017, Governor Newsom, a few years later, just last year, said that that's the through executive order, that's the rule across the entire state of California. So that helps when our port isn't the only one demanding those zero emission trucks, but ports across the state. And we're seeing that the state is working with other states, and we're working with other cities globally. The mayor has established, through his chairmanship of C40, the International Climate Cities Leadership Group, a Green Ports Forum, where we're looking at things of how do we work together on green shipping lanes, on demanding to the vehicle manufacturers zero emission trucks, because we know that we can provide the scale that these companies need to get the technology out there.
So I think that's actually a good bridge to our first audience question here. And again, if you're listening to this event, feel free to submit a question. We're going to do a couple of these. We have a question from someone watching who asks, have any other cities in the world gone 100% clean energy? What can LA learn from that experience? I'll open that up here to anyone who might have an answer to that.
So quickly, while folks are kind of thinking through their Rolodex of cities, as I said, the mayor is chair of C40 Cities, which is 97 of the world's mega cities and mega city mayors working together to, really, I would say, undeniably raise the bar, set the bar for ambitious climate action. You have cities like Copenhagen that have pledged to be an entire carbon neutral city by 2025. They have a port with really important port operators that operate around the entire world. And so, what they can innovate, even they're a very small city, what a city like Copenhagen can do is provide significant innovation that can be adopted way beyond, its own borders and its capacity within the city. So there are cities like that. There are ports around the world that are doing really, really fascinating things that we're learning through the C40 Green Ports Forum. But I would say that, LA, given its role with a municipal utility, as opposed to a city that's buying power from a private utility, I think that we're out in front.
Yeah, and Sammy, just to raise, just some issues around, or there's complexity in that question, because there's this debate of what 100% renewable energy even means, because it's hard to get 24/7 renewable energy. So there have been entire countries that for hours or days even have achieved 100% renewable energy. And a lot of times during those times, those countries or cities or regions are generating so much electricity that they actually have to export it, or they actually have to curtail it. So California is actually in that situation already, where there are hours of the day where we might actually be generating so much solar electricity, we actually have to dump it. We have to curtail it. We can't utilize it all. So this challenge of getting 24/7 renewable energy is the highest challenge, I would say. And that's really what this study was about. And, it's not a city, but I think one of the really interesting case studies is what Google is trying to do right now. So a lot of the big companies has said that, we're going to go to 100% renewable energy, but they've done it with offsets, paying for what are called renewable energy credits. But what Google is trying to do, they're not there yet, but they're trying to get it such that their data centers are actually provided renewable energy 24/7, 100% of the time. And that's really the difficulty and the complexity of this question.
Yeah, I think that we're in the spring season right now in California, just building on your point. And this is a time of year when energy demand isn't too high because it's not that hot yet, but we've got lots of sunlight. And we've been seeing, on the not the LA grid, but on the main California power grid, numbers in the low 80%, I think, for, solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower. So that makes you think, gee, 100's not that far away, but it is, it's harder, other times of year. And the definition of renewable thing is interesting too, because California currently defines renewable, I believe, solar, wind for the most part, geothermal, and, small hydropower. And it's like, what else should count? In the LA 100 study, there are scenarios with biofuels, scenarios without. There's scenarios where LA keeps its stake in the Palo Verde nuclear plant in Arizona, and scenarios where LA gives that up. And so there are all sorts of interesting. I'm agreeing with your answer, basically, that it's just to say 100% renewable. What does that mean? It's a good question. Yeah. We've got another audience question here. Actually, two questions that are kind of similar. One of which is from a senior environmental studies major at USC. Who wants to know, is working on solar power, and they want to know what are specific actions that we as individuals, especially as students, can take to incorporate the findings of LA 100 in city policy moving forward. That's an interesting question.
I guess I'll take a stab at it. One of the things that I think is so critical is just informing yourself and arming yourself with information. For example, one of the facts that gets tossed around so much, even by people that know a lot about energy, is the fact that wind and solar are so expensive. In a lot of regional markets, wind and solar are already the cheapest unsubsidized fuels. So, the cost of solar has come down 99% over the last few decades, which is absolutely incredible. So just things like, finding out who supplies your energy, who supplies your water, like these environmental benchmarks that you can kind of casually, slip into conversations at parties because people want to hear about this. But I think, getting the best data at the date is really important because people still have really poor information about this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of huge opportunities, even from an economic perspective, to really to lean on here.
Anyone else want to take a stab at the question? Adam, Lauren?
No, not this.
Well, I have to say that the students, even at USC, have been doing an amazing job of working with particularly the new amazing leadership of USC and really helping build a sustainable vision and a sustainability foundation in USC's operations and USC's position in the community. And I have to say, you've got amazing leadership at the top, but she is also really supported by the work that you as students are doing to demonstrate what a priority these issues are, and the movement to clean energy and the movement away from fossil fuels. And so, what you guys are doing and how you're using your voice and you're bringing solutions to the table of decision makers is really having an impact.
This is not a question I had planned to ask, but now you've got me curious with that answer, Lauren. Maybe Kelly or Adam will know this. A bunch of universities have been, swayed now by this movement from divest from fossil fuels, divest university endowments. Is that something that USC has done, or is there activism surrounding that at USC?
There's a lot of activism surrounding it. I do not believe that at this point we've made the commitment. Adam, you might.
I think
No, we haven't, but I would say, if you just look at the market outlook, things don't look good for, investing in the coal industry. And the oil industry has been hedging its bets. I've always found somewhat humorous the fact that BP, starting 15 years ago, they started touting it as standing for beyond petroleum. So I think some of that.
We're wrong.
We've got to interrupt here. Gary from USC, who helped to organize this, and I've just checked this out, and he's right. USC last month did announce a plan to divest from fossil fuels. So there you go. I had missed that.
Do you know how I know that? It's because the mayor has convened a youth council for climate action, and we have a few USC students on our youth council, and they're the ones that there's a couple that led this campaign, and there's some amazing, every young person on this council is amazing, but they worked with the administration. They got really smart on the issues. Stories of not knowing anything about finances and markets and things like that, and got smart on the issues, was able to make the case so students can have a huge impact. And you guys did it. And USC has made an incredible decision, and it's got buy-in across the board. And it's something you guys should be really proud of.
And those students have been working for years on this issue. So it's really an incredible achievement, that just diligence year after year, graduating class after graduating classes. Just like you said, they've gotten so much information, and they just continued to advocate for it. And we got a great outcome.
So we're running low on time here, so I think we're going to close it out. I'm hoping maybe if each of you, so many conversations about climate change are pessimistic and depressing, and so I like that this conversation has been generally a lot more optimistic. If maybe you could each, close out by giving us, one thing, ideally something that hasn't been discussed, or at least discussed too much here, that makes you optimistic this Earth Day in particular for where we're going with the future of the city and the planet.
I can kick us off. So I'm an engineer, so I get excited about the technical wonkiness of the system. And I think one really neat opportunity that this 100% renewable energy goal offers us is the abilities as consumers to become part of the grid. So active participants in our energy consumption, rather than just like turning on our electricity, whenever it suits us. We can think about, well, maybe I should run my dishwasher in the middle of the day when we have a lot of solar, rather than at 7 p.m. when there's a lot of natural gas on the grid. So the customer, whether they're generating solar energy on top of their house, or they're choosing when to charge their electric car, or they're planning how they use their electricity usage across the day, is really going to be an active participant in meeting this goal. And I think that's really exciting.
Thank you, Kelly. Adam or Lauren, real quick here.
Well, I find the Biden infrastructure plan to be very promising because it's broadened the definition of infrastructure. It's much better on infrastructure than some think. Liz Cheney recently came out and said only 6% of it pertains to infrastructure, but fact checking is it's several times that amount. And it's good to see that some climate related considerations are coming under the heading of infrastructure, and they really deserve to be. So I see that as very promising, both in terms of the funding, the job creation. We talked about the small number of jobs associated with LA 100 scenarios, but that's partly because we had to factor in the displacement of ordinary fossil fuel operations. So that, cut the numbers a bit. But as far as infrastructure development in general, we're talking about add-ons. And so you're going to have much bigger job possibilities there. And then this transition theme of helping people who are caught in the squeeze and may lose their jobs and livelihoods and communities, I think is very promising, as well as getting over the stakeholder obstacles to implementing some very valuable policies.
Lauren, parting shot here.
I think that we're in a moment of a confluence of all the right factors coming together. Adam, as you say, we have a potential, hopefully from a negative side, but in terms of the investment, this is potentially a once in a lifetime opportunity for investment in climate solutions, combined with a moment where the solutions have never been more available, and the interest and excitement and enthusiasm across the political landscape has really, really increased in dedication to this issue. And so when I look at a study and the outcomes of something like LA 100, I have to pinch myself, because to think about how far we've come in such a short amount of time around acceptance of just this one issue of 100% renewable energy and the role renewable energy can play as a foundational solution to our overall clean green energy transition, it is remarkable. And it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't said, we just have to push for this. We just have to understand it better and set the goal and work toward it. And I think that is a reminder of how we have to treat this crisis, is an understanding of what we have to do and work toward it. Not ask, can we, but really just ask, how are we going to do it, and keep working. And that brings more partners along with us.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but this has been an excellent discussion. Kelly, Laura, and Adam, thank you so much for being a part of this, and thanks to USC for asking me to host. Thanks very much, everybody, and happy Earth Day.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and visit us at podcast.usc.edu.